And I think 25 maybe. Yeah, that's looking fine. So I'm gonna hit A and then delete everything, and then add in a cube, and then scale it to be kind of the size of a bridge, and then scale it out the other way so that it fills the entire frame. I'm gonna add in my human scale, and there. Now, this is where I find reference to be quite useful. A lot of people use reference as inspiration, and that's fine. I, for the most part, use it for like adding in details and texturing, thinking about different architecture styles and that sort of thing. Not necessarily that to copy any particular one, but just thinking about different ideas. So I'm probably going to drag this down. I'm not going to worry about the side of the bridge because that won't really be in the frame. And then now I'm going to add, so of course the walkway should be separate from the area that cars are going to go through. I think that's about good. I want to make sure that your height is good. I usually use face project while modeling. This used to be called just face, but in 3.3 they added this face nearest, so they have face project, face nearest. I think this one's about elbow height. If you haven't caught on yet, I'm trying to create like a kind of wall here so that people won't fall off. I'm not an architecture expert, so I don't know what the right words for everything are. Make sure I apply the scale. And well, yeah, what I did was I kind of extruded that out, so ES and then scale out, and then I guess I can scrap that. And then yeah, something like that. Seeing some weirdness. I think my topology is fine. Yeah, I'm probably just gonna delete this and delete that, just so that we can have a kind of simple cube. So the design that I'm looking at right now, it has like this X here, and then it has like this other bar here, and then these other bars here. These are a bit annoying sometimes because the rotation can get messed up and things like that. I'm not trying to make this perfect. I think that's fine. I think I can, yeah, you can actually just go scale it on the axis that is kind of going this way by 0, and then that'll flatten it out. You want to make sure, because we're going to array this, you want to make sure that this is actually, that this is completely flat. So just make sure that you're using the median point, so that's the period to bring up this menu. And then SX is 0 to flatten that out. And now I'm going to grab this and then go Shift D RZ 180, and that'll flip it around. You do have to make adjustments from there. Actually no. Here, I take that back. If you set your origin to your geometry, go Shift D RZ 180, it should be pretty much correct. And then I'm actually going to make these a little bit thicker. So I'm gonna go like normal Z, so that's this direction. It's kind of messing this up now. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, and then for this I can just go SX is 0 and then GX, and then hold down Control to snap it on there. As for this flickering here, when I was working on this before, I just kind of scaled it that direction, and that fixes it. Kind of a hacky way of fixing it. I think maybe, yeah, if you join the objects using Control J, so shift clicking the other one after selecting one of them, and then Control J to join, that will also fix the problem, it seems. Still not great though, in my opinion, because you still have like overlapping faces. Okay. And I think I'm gonna start on this one now. For the most part, you can't do everything in one step. It's really like, okay, you have to have good modeling, you have to have good texturing, and then you have to have good lighting. If any one of those are like terrible or like rushed, then the end result is just not going to be great. We're not aiming for mathematically perfect here, or at least I'm not. And then I'm just going to go GZ, hold down Control, snap that. And then select everything, and then go in vertex select mode, select all of that. flatten that out. Now we do want this to be like behind the fence. And there's a good way of creating the fence without having to model all of the detail, which I'll get to in a minute here. I'm going to make sure that my origin is set to my geometry. Go Shift D, Z, and then RX 180. And then that successfully flips that around. I think I'm going to flatten this out as well. So SZ0. I'm going to add this here at the bottom. This is going to be in front of it. Now I'm going to add in a plane, and this will be the actual fence itself. Let's move this guy out of the way. And then make sure the normals of this plane are facing this way. Actually need to fix normals here. So when you have a face loop like this selected, you can press E, then S, then Shift Z, and then just drag out, and that'll create something that looks like this. And then when you go S, Y, you can scale that out to kind of make it more even. This isn't really mathematically correct. A kind of better way of doing this, but it's slightly more tedious. If you go back into object mode, apply the scale, and then select the face loop that you're targeting, and then go to face, solidify faces, and then just put this in the negative range. Then that will kind of do the same thing, but it's going to be even. And then you end up with an extra face loop that's inside because it didn't delete it automatically. So you have to delete that by selecting it and then faces, deleting faces. So oftentimes, especially with older architecture, there's a lot of this type of thing where you see like this kind of coming out of there like that. And by the way, if you're trying to select a face loop, you're going to want to select like one of the perpendicular edges, so like either this edge or this edge. If you try to select like this edge, then it's not going to do what you want it to do, and if you try to select like, you know, just some random face, then it's probably not going to do what you wanted to do. So make sure you select one of the perpendicular edges kind of going around the face loop. Again, either this one, or this one, and it's alt clicking one of those in face select mode. So we have our bevel. I may want to reduce that to like 0.004. I think 0.005 was what I used. And then I had these spheres. The reference also has these kind of going across here. So you can just array these. And this is actually pretty far out, so I think I'm going to bring that in kind of like that. And then I'm also going to bring out another one of these like so. Okay, I'm going to add this kind of other thing here. This doesn't have to be too detailed, it's really small, so. Think something like that. I think this is looking pretty good, so we can start on the next part. And just scale that in like that. The height of this should be a little bit less than the height of this one. We can sort that out once we start thinking about composition as well. You probably want it to be a bit thicker than that. Okay, I'm going to grab this face loop here and then scale it in like that. Maybe I'm going to grab the bottom and scale it out as well. And then I think I'm going to do something along these lines, so just extrude that down so that this part is flat and this part has a little bit of slope, and then yeah. Think okay. Of course, we're going to want a bevel on this as well, because right now the edges are too sharp. Okay. Going to add some more detail at the top, and then we're going to have like these beams going through here. So I'm just going to go S Shift X to to kind of shrink that. I guess you could also go in edit mode, select everything, Alt S. That will kind of do something similar, although not exactly the same, because you see it's scaling a little bit on the x-axis as well. I'm going to drag this over. I'm going to want to add bevels to these, and also this one's going to be deleted actually, because I want this all to line up, because I'm going to array this as well. And by the way, if you don't have it kind of lined up like flat like we did here, then what happens is if you set an offset of 1 in the array, then you'll end up with like gaps. So in order to keep things, I am kind of trying to keep things mathematically correct, quote unquote, in that regard at least, because I want to avoid having those types of issues. I need to go to the median point. There we go. Oh yeah, and this side as well. Probably just going to copy modifiers, so just select the stuff that doesn't have a modifier on it, and then select an object that does have the modifier that you want to apply on it, and then Control L, and then copy modifiers, and then the objects that you selected that did not have that modifier on it will now have the modifier that was on the last object that you selected on it. And I should say that even if these objects did have a modifier, they would be replaced with whatever is on this. So okay, I think we're done with this. I mean, we could add some more detail. I think maybe something like this would work. I mean, I didn't do that when I was creating this. I think I may have done, yeah, I did this, yeah. So I think I added an edge loop there and then scaled that in a little bit. If you want to make adjustments to the height of this, right now it's like multiple objects, so you can just select all of the objects that are kind of involved in the area that you want to select, and then you can go into wireframe mode, and then I go into vertex select mode, but you don't always have to, and then just select this area, and then you're basically editing multiple objects at this point, right? So anything that you do will apply to all of the objects. So even if you're selecting multiple objects, it's still going to behave the way you want it to, as though they were one object, but you know, they're still not changing to one object. So from here you can drag up or down and change the height as you need to. We can work out a few issues later. Now I want to start thinking about texturing, and I think I'm going to start with the water shader. So by the way, shift right click to move this around, in case you forgot. Okay, so I'm going to scale this up by something very large, like 3,000. I mean, technically, because the camera is going to kind of be pointing down, it doesn't really matter too much, but okay, so I'm going to go to the shading tab and then make sure that I have my plane selected and then hit new. You probably already know that if I drag this down, the object will become more reflective, and then if I drag this up, it'll be less reflective. Pretty much no object has like no reflections, but you know, some very rough object is going to have a higher value here. So the reason that I bring this up is that RGB values, so like this slider here, is actually the same as this slider here. So if I plug this into there and adjust this, these are the same values as these, as long as I haven't messed with the saturation. You don't want to plug in values, or you don't want to plug in anything with like color data with actual saturation in a roughness, because that's kind of a mismatch. You would have a yellow here and then a gray here. If this is completely desaturated, then it can serve as a gray output. Hopefully that makes sense. Now going further with this, if I plug a noise texture into there, actually I'm going to preview this by Control-Shift clicking on this. You should enable the Node Wrangler add-on in case you haven't. So this one right here. So you can see as I scale this up, you can see how like parts of it are darker and parts of it are lighter. So the entire thing corresponds to an RGB value. It's just different parts of it have different RGB values. And you can see it's also grayscale, which is helpful. It's more universal. It can be plugged into pretty much, well, it can't be plugged into the normal directly, but it can be used as a normal, which we'll get into later. But you know, you can plug it into the color, you can use it for displacement. So the reason that if you go into texture, where's texture here, and then just select any of these, they always have a factor which is like a grayscale. It's because it's more compatible with the overall system. So yeah, these darker values are closer to 0, and then the lighter values are closer to 1. So if I plug it into the roughness and then plug this in there, now the areas that are darker in the noise texture are more reflective, and then the areas that are lighter are less reflective because they have a higher value in this. So now I'm going to change the view here to something like 30,000. Like if you see that your camera is like clipping, or you don't see the end of the plane, then it's because this is too low. So there are a lot of textures here. Like I for example just brought in a wave texture. It looks like this, and you know, the same principle applies here with the darker values being like closer to 0, and then the lighter values being closer to 1. And in case you're wondering like what a texture like looks like, you can always just visualize it by Control-Shift clicking on it. And another one that's commonly used, actually wave texture I don't use that often. The ones that are most often used, I would say, are Voronoi, Musgrave, and Noise. These other ones do have their uses, but again, you can visualize them yourself. Yeah, so Musgrave looks like this. It's kind of more, it's similar to Noise, but it's more contrasty. It has a little bit more waves, like on the edges of the white parts, or yeah, on the edges in general. And then, yeah, so, and then Voronoi is a bit interesting. You might be thinking that, well, this is fairly similar to noise. We can actually do some pretty interesting things with this. For example, if I drag this contrast up, and then if I change this to F2, Chevy Chev, actually not F2, F1, and then crank up the scale, now we have this look, which is like a grid. So then creating the actual water shader isn't that difficult. We can just bring in a noise and then a bump. So this will kind of convert the format, because this alone will cause problems. So if you plug it into the height and then plug this normal output into the normal input there, it'll kind of do what it's supposed to do. If you visualize the bump, it actually looks really weird if I crank up the scale. Yeah, so you can see that this is kind of what it looks like. This should not be used for anything other than normal, basically. This right now isn't quite what I want. I'm actually gonna click on this texture here and then press Control T, and that'll bring this up. And then I found object to give good results. If you're wondering what these are, generated, object, and UV are the only ones that I use. I mean, you can use some other ones. This is basically how the texture should be outputted, I guess. So there are a variety of different ways. So like, I believe it defaults to generated, but this might not always give good results, because if your object is like stretched, then it's going to kind of like stretch out the texture as well. So I find object worked pretty well when I was doing this. If object isn't giving you the results that you want, then you might want to change it to UV, and then apply the scale, and then edit mode, select the object, and then smart UV project, and then it might give you better results then. I'm going to crank this down because that was just for visualizing. So we're actually going to be using this setup a lot. So in order to do that without having to duplicate it multiple times, we can select all of them and then right click and then group. So you actually entered a different menu now. If you select the group output here on the right and then press tab, you'll go back to where you were before. But you see that this has changed to something called a node group. And I'm actually going to change this name here to noise. And this includes the nodes that we selected to create a quote-unquote group with. So if we select this and then press tab, now we're back in this group. It not only helps with like compressing the graph, but it also can help with like if we duplicate this and then we change these values, like if I take this input and then plug it into this group input here and then press tab, and then I can change this. But if I duplicate this and then change this, it's actually not going to affect this one. So in case you are still wondering, this factor output is kind of coming out of here. So you can think of this as like this is going through here, and then this is like what's coming out of this is like coming through here. I'm trying to think of the right way to word this, but the reason you have this group output is so that you can decide, okay, this group ends here, and then as soon as you hit this point, this is then kind of outputted. The output of this is like here. So, and then this node doesn't do anything other than to separate the group from the rest of the graph. And I should also mention that you can have multiple outputs. So like if I take this color and then put that into there, then this will also show up here. And if you want to adjust things, like maybe you plug something in and then you unplugged it and then you don't actually want this, like in my case, you can select the group output and then press N to bring up this menu, and then I think it's in group here, and then you see the outputs and then the inputs. So because I plugged this into here, this is now considered an input. So in my case, I want to get rid of one of the outputs. So this factor here is this here, and then this color here is this here, so I can remove that color. And then to clarify what the input does, it overrides the value of this, I guess. So maybe overrides isn't quite the right term, but if I change this, it's changing this value here. And that's of course because this is what this is plugged into, and you can't have multiple inputs as well. So like I'm actually going to take the roughness, detail, distortion, plug it into there, and now the same thing applies here. Changing this will change the respective values that you're there plugged into from here. Setting this to 4D will allow you to adjust this W, which is a seed, so like it'll change what the noise looks like without changing any of these. And then I'm going to plug that in there and then press N and then select this W here and then move it up by hitting this arrow a bunch of times. I'm also going to add in a brightness contrast node and plug those in there. So we can set the base color here to black and the roughness to 0. And now it kind of is starting to look like water. My scale, I might want to adjust my scale. Be sure to apply the scale on your plane. 0.3, let's see how that looks. Yeah, 0.3 looks kind of decent, and that's a good start, I think. So I want to blend this with another noise, so that we have low frequency detail and high frequency detail. So I'm going to duplicate this and then plug that in there. And then use another noise for the actual blending. And then this is, of course, going to be some random seed. It's common to use a color ramp for stuff like this. It's similar to how contrast behaves, but you know, you could say you have a little bit more control, or like it's specifically targeting the black values and white values. Now's a good time to start on lighting. I'll link the HDRI that I use in the description. Okay, this is looking weird. When I was doing this before, I didn't use this, so it's Control X to get rid of that. I just used 1.5 here and 0.2 here for the factor for the blending, and then a 0.2 here, and then 0.4 here. And that looks all right. So we can probably set up the camera now. I think I used a really high focal length, like 128. Okay, so I'm actually going to array these across now. So what I'm probably going to do, join all of these so these have the exact same bevel. So if you try to array it across, you might see these lines here, and that's where one of the objects is meeting the other. A way to fix that is by putting the array first in the modifier stack and then checking merge. But that kind of ruins our bevel. So this is kind of a destructive solution to this. So I'm gonna duplicate this and then select the object and then press M. Add a new collection, call it like unapplied. So in case we need to fix something, then we can go back to this and yeah, do that. So from here, we're gonna apply the bevel modifier to, yeah, that's not really doing anything, so I'm gonna apply that, and then I'm gonna flatten out these edges again. So just select these, need to kind of make sure that I'm not selecting this, and then select this as well, and then make sure that I'm on the individual origins, and then I'm going to go SX0. Whoops, I selected too much stuff here. Yeah, I need to deselect these. I think that should be good now. So SX0, and now both of these are flattened out. We have our bevel applied, so we won't have issues with this. And if we check merge, everything works. We have our bevel, and we have our array without those lines. Now we can do something similar with this and this. So okay, in this case, it doesn't seem to be messing up our bevel. And looks like everything is working fine here. So we can array this across. And then I think I'm just gonna select this, shift select this, Control L, copy modifiers. And looks like our bevel is working just fine here. So now we need enough room for a car to go through here. And then we can duplicate these on the other side if we want. Now let's start on texturing these. I'm going to start with the metal, which is more interesting. So I'm going to create a new material, and then I'm going to start with the noise. And then we're going to make this metallic. And then I'm probably just going to visualize this. I'm going to try plugging that into the factor. Okay, so there's too much contrast right now. I think I'm going to mess with the base color a little bit as well. So I'm probably going to add in a color ramp. And the color ramp is pretty useful because we can actually change the colors of like the noise this way. I think I used like kind of orangey colors when I was doing mine. And then probably going to turn down the contrast. That's starting to look okay. Probably gonna turn down the scale. I guess we can add the fence as well. So for this, I'm gonna go into edit mode, go into face select mode, select our plane that's kind of in between, or like right here, and then click this plus right here in the material settings, and then assign, and then add a new material, and then I'm going to create that grid that I did earlier. So switch this to Chebyshev. I believe these are like the names of the mathematicians that created these noise patterns. And then contrast, yeah. And then turn down the randomness. And then I'm actually not going to plug this into the base color. I'm going to plug this into the alpha. So again, the black parts are where like it's going to be transparent, and then the white parts are going to be where it's opaque. So if I go into render view, you can see that happening. And I actually didn't know that this also affects lighting. I didn't know that until recently, at least in cycles it does. So I'm going to go back into material 1, and then just continue making adjustments. I think something along those lines is pretty good. Now we can do something similar for the concrete. So I'm going to add in a Musgrave, and then Control T, and then I'm just going to group this. The hotkey for this grouping is Control G, so you don't have to go into the right click menu. find texturing to be a little bit more interesting than modeling. So it's way too dark in some areas. I might just use a noise for that actually. I think for the base color I used Musgrave. Something like that. This one's fairly desaturated, although maybe slightly. I definitely used Musgrave for the bump. Right now it looks terrible because of the settings, so we can adjust the settings a little bit. If you turn the dimension down and the detail up, it can actually give you pretty good results. Kind of seeing some weirdness here. So I guess shade auto smooth kind of fixes that. Shade auto smooth is new in 3.3. So I'm actually going to do something similar to what I did before. It's very common to use like a mix to blend between two things like this. That kind of looks okay. I think the distance is a bit too much, so I can turn it down. Actually, I need to add another, I need to add a blend between these. So 1 is a bit too much. 0.8, a bit better. Maybe I'll go with 0.15. Okay. Can probably just use the same material, so select this, shift select that, control L, link materials. I don't think the UV is actually going to affect anything. So let's add in the car now. I'll link this in the description as well. So if you navigate over to the blend file and then go over to object, just select everything by pressing A. So that'll select all this and then append. And now we have our little car and all this stuff. We actually don't need the plane, we don't need the camera. And select that. And then I'm just going to put it in its own collection. Press M, new collection, car. And then rotate it on the individual origins, medium point. And then starting to establish composition now. I want to make sure that the wheels are on the ground. And then I got the silver one here, but I don't like the fact that this shell is like overlapping through the mesh, so through the rest of the mesh, so just get rid of that. And there's like a black shell underneath, which looks fine, so I don't know what's going on there. Okay, I'm going to position the camera. Feel free to try to identify which car this is. I don't actually know myself, other than the branding perhaps. Okay. And then for the road, I'm actually just going to use an image texture. There are ways to do it procedurally. It's just easier and perhaps more accurate to do it with an image texture. So you want to make sure that you get the ambient occlusion, the color, the normal GL, and the roughness. So I actually can't drag them in all at the same time, so I'm going to drag them in individually. And there we go. In case you're wondering, the normal DX is for other apps, like Unreal uses DirectX, or at least it can, and Blender uses OpenGL, which is why it's called normal GL. So from here you can just plug them in, make sure to add in a normal map in between the normal connection, and then should change that to non-color data, and then to add in some ambient occlusion you can add in a mix RGB, change this to multiply, and then plug the ambient occlusion into color 2, and then set that to non-color. You can increase this. I'm going to UV project this, so just make sure that your scale is applied, and then into edit mode, select everything by pressing A, and then press U, and then go Smart UV Project, and then OK. And then I'm also going to tile these. And just connect this vector. You can click and drag down to select all of them. And then I think 25 maybe. Yeah, that's looking fine. So that's pretty much what I did for this. Another thing you might want to do is go into your world shading settings and then press Control T. So select the environment texture and then press Control T, and then you'll see this. And then change the Z rotation. So this is kind of moving the sun. I think I used something like that because it's going to look better if the sun is coming from there rather than there. I think that's giving some pretty good results. So I encourage you to add some debris along the floor here, right next to these walls or barriers here, or medians I think they might be called, I don't know. But essentially dust and debris is very likely to accumulate where two surfaces meet like that. So things like rocks and maybe some foliage. I also suggest messing with the depth of field and the focal length. It can kind of add some atmosphere to the scene. As for compositing, there's really not that much to add. We can add in a color balance. And maybe tweak it a little bit. Maybe like 1.03. So before compositing, after compositing, a subtle difference. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching.